Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of The World of Averant. So far, we've got all the way up to episode 5, and I'm glad this is working out. Bringing back stories that we started off at that got us into this so much is definitely a treat. Knowing that the story that I created that was a simple... what was supposed to be a simple story has evolved itself into something that we're still playing today. The overarching story itself did start from a certain place. Characters that still exist in our current lore. We have the gods of fate and destiny that exist in both campaigns. In campaign 3, Druid, Averant, Gladdolin, as the 3 different gods of fate and destiny. And in campaign 2 and 1.5, Gladdolin is a sole god of fate and destiny. But how did he get there? How did he earn this title of such legendary importance? How did one earn the right to gain the power of 3 witches by his lonesome? We'll get that story eventually, but to understand, you must understand Gladdolin himself. And that's what we're here to talk about today. Today's story, the Lone Druid. About the same age as both Seraphina and Averant, Gladdolin himself came from an area that our stories randomly talk about, Nelithir. Compared to being part of the kingdom himself, he wasn't actually in the castle. He wasn't naturally part of any kind of kingdom other than just knowing that it was always part of Nelithir. But he was part of a royal family. The Rosewinds themselves were always leaders of a great tribe. Nelithir is vast, and compared to other continents, they have one thing that many others don't: vast forest lands that take up almost 2/3 of the whole nation, and therefore they need protectorates that control them. The Rosewind clan has always been in charge of leading the wood elves throughout those lands, making sure that they are safe. They are protected, both from inside and outside. The lands themselves are very precious to Nelithir. Many continents do obviously appreciate their land that they have, but Nelithirians, them being mostly elves, have a specific attunement to their land. A true belief that it is theirs, spirit and soul. Gladdolin himself in the Rosewind clan was one of a kind, and for a long time unappreciated. His clan, being mostly wood elves, whether they were part of the Rosewind family or just other elves that were part of the clan, which itself circumferenced of 300 at least, depending give or take the time. But, unlike him, they were mostly fighters, barbarians, rangers, ones that fell into the line of the blade, rarely ones of magic. This was the way that they believed, that sword, axe, and shield were the way to defend their home. Occasionally, one would learn the way of magic, but they would still be a fighter nonetheless. And even then it was rare. Being son, and the only son, to the great chieftain of the Rosewind clan, Gladdolin did not find his comfort in what the others did. There were many differences that he had that made him an outsider to the rest of them, especially to his father. His father expected a certain thing of his son: strength, constitution, Gladdolin was not a weak person, but these were not his traits that he favored. Gladdolin preferred the way of the Druid. It was not very common in that area for Druids to be ever so popular. It wasn't uncommon for Wood Elves to be Druids, but in the Rosewind clan, there's only been a couple in existence through the thousands of years. And it was not expected of a royal line, especially to be the son of Torin. But Gladdolin was confident in his ways, determined that this is the way that he'd like to be. In many ways, he was different from his own people, even more than just being a druid. Gladdolin wasn't one that was just always about peace, but Gladdolin always believed in love and comfort first, still always knowing that battle will come. His clan was also very traditional. And unfortunately, it was odd, again, for the clan's later son to choose his own. Many royals pick their suitor for their children. Gladdolin fell in love with another royal. Unopposed to his father, he fell in love with another male elf. In this clan, this was not an approved aspect of life. But Gladdolin didn't care. He loved his father. But he lived by his own way. He didn't want to be a soldier. He didn't want to be a fighter. And he didn't want to follow his father's path. This is neither what he wanted, nor what he felt in his heart. Alston, his love of his life, the only one he chose and the one he stuck with, they had a very romantic pairing. Always rejected by the community, but due to the fact that Gladdolin was the chieftain's son, it was not super difficult for them. They at least had privileges that others could not get away with. As much as Torin refused this, there were greater things on his mind than the choosing of relationships of his son. The double-sided blade that Gladdolin had inside right now that allowed him to be immune to his father's wrath as far as his choice of suitors and his choice of lifestyle was the plague. The plague itself at this point was slowly making its way to Nelithir. Originally, it rarely touched Nelithir. Not by choice, but due to its location, it wasn't moving to Nelithir as quickly as it was hitting the Heartland Kingdom. And the first thing it hit was the Forest Lands, making it ever so prudent for the Rosewind clan to defend the Forest Lands with whatever they had. Even if they had to lay down their own lives by the forest, this was their way. And therefore, Torin's only focus. At this point, if his son chose not to fight, he had no time to force him to do it. But Alston was different. Alston was a fighter. Alston was a great warrior, allowing them also a sort of freedom. Due to his specific skill set, he could not just be abandoned due to his choice of suitor. Alston was a prodigy, a perfectionist with the blade. Surgical, precise, in all forms of combat. Melee, ranged, unarmed. But he preferred the way of the scimitar and shield. Also knowing a bit of magic, learning off of Gladdolin. an eldritch knight. And due to him being a progeny, it was chosen due to the relationship to ignore it. Gladdolin is the royal son, and Elston is a warrior that they could not just abandon. So they left the relationship be, allowing things to happen. This is not exactly what they would have preferred, but it was better than them getting abandoned otherwise. Within the years of them being in a relationship, they found love more and more every day, finding times to escape the battle to spend time with each other, until they got married in secret, eventually telling everybody else, but making sure that Connecticut halted by anybody's decision. In Nelithir, marriage has a different value than many other countries and religions. Everyone values marriage, but in here it is spiritual. It is part of the soul. When you marry in Nelithir, you're bonding each other. It is a sin to leave a marriage for another. It is an act of disgrace upon your house to do it. Therefore, when the marriage was bonded, as much as Torin refused, at this point he had nothing left to say. He had to accept this fact, and he did. He learned to soon try to understand his son. Understand that no matter what, it's Gladdolin still his son, and there will be a place for him. And eventually tried to find a place for him, knowing that he is a druid. They still needed some help. And Gladdolin was not wanting to be a soldier, but he had a specific gift for being a tactician, knowing the way to plan out attacks. And therefore he untidily became kind of a war planner. Not really beyond the battle, but planning certain attacks. Not a few months later, the plague started overreaching throughout many of the lands. And during the time of the chosen for the Tritons to go through, the plague was still spreading. In surprise of the Roseman clan, thinking that they were able to hold off enough until the calm was going to happen, but did not. And taken by surprise, the plague pushed in further, and they were not ready. They were exhausted. And unfortunately, Aliston was lost to Gladdolin, being pulled into the plague, sacrificing himself for Gladdolin. With the last bit, Torin was fighting off the rest of his clan and told Gladdolin to run. Find somewhere to go. No matter what, he loved his son. He did not want to see him lost. And he did not want to focus on his son while he must protect. So Gladdolin ran, unknowing where to go, taking time to figure out what he must do. He's not a soldier, he can't do anything with the plague. At least not like this. When he learned about what happened with the plague, why did he not go to sleep, he found out that eventually through his travels that something went amiss. So the tradition went back into a whole start. Within 10 years, the new chosen would be out of the Heartwinds. Gladdolin took some time trying to understand, trying to figure out what to do. Practice his magic and figure out how to come through with this. He wanted revenge for sure, but this was not a creature you could just fight with one-on-one. Gladdolin was not a fighter. At least not yet. Gladdolin was proficient with a couple things. Obviously, Gladdolin was a good strategist. And with enough people on his side, he could be a good support, plan out a lot of attacks, and strategize a way. But he needed a team. The other thing he was good at was his wild shape. He inherently was able to figure out how to transform into specific creatures that many other druids could not, even at his age. He had a certain gift to transform into creatures that his power level should not be able to allow him to do. I thought of this as maybe a sign. In more sense, it would be sent to him. Gladdolin was a believer in the gods, but there was not really anyone that he truly focused on. But he knew a sign when he saw it. He couldn't understand them, but he would take what he could, any kind of information he would absorb, until he eventually assumed that what he was being told was to head over to Castle Heartwind. And with the time so fortuitous, he assumed that that would be the time. By the time he arrived, that was when the new chosen would be announced. So he made his way there, using every bit of coin he had at his disposal, keeping his name mostly concealed. His name wasn't too far stretched across Nelithir. His real name was only really known within the borders. But he kept it secure, wanted to make sure that Nelithir didn't know of him leaving. Who knows if they would care, but he wanted to do this on his own, without their support. Taking ship after ship, using whatever little coin he had at his disposal to eventually make his way over to Heartwind Lands, but unfortunately it took him so far, journeying mostly by land, walking, running. Luckily, his panther form helped him, until he finally made his way to the crowded kingdom of Heartwind. Taking his time, knowing that he's got weeks on his side. But it was packed nonetheless, many people getting there early. He didn't know what he was going to do at this point. Compared to the others that were part of the group, he didn't really know much about the Great Journey. His clan was not really taught about it. He knew the basic things. He knew every 100 years, give or take, the firstborn of some family would be sent out, and whatever they would do would allow the calm to happen. You know that during that calm, usually the elves fought against the humans. He had no resentments against the humans. He didn't understand why the fight was happening. But he didn't know anything past that. Compared to Alair Valerian, it was the exact opposite. Alair Valerian was curious. Alair Valerian had information. Gladdolin was the other way. Gladdolin just knew one thing. That a human would be picked to go on this great journey. It would take him as far as the plague. And with that, he would then learn information and try to figure out one thing that he wanted back more than anything else. His family back. His husband and his father. Believing them both to be dead. And that'd be half true. But he didn't know otherwise, never going back to where the battle was. Now, his father also had a couple of responsibilities that Gladdolin was not aware of. It was an ill omen on Nelithir if the great chieftains didn't follow certain requests before their death. Very much, you cannot die until you fill all your requests, and then you have our permission to die. But the great chieftain of the Rosewind clan had one thing that they must always do. One thing that they must always protect. And the one thing they should always make sure will survive. They were the protectors of the Weird Sisters. A set of triplet gods that dictated fate and destiny. No one knows why the Rosewind clan has been in charge of this task, but it always has seemed to be the way. And his father was arrogant. Gladdolin knew somewhere out there his father's probably still alive, that he is too stubborn to die. That maybe he could find him once again. And then maybe, some way, somewhere, somehow, you could get the power to bring back Alston. These are the only things that Gladdolin cared about. Realistically, the plague itself was this large cataclysmic thing that Gladdolin was a realist. What can a simple druid do to stop such a cataclysmic event? But he'd learn in time. Not only was a realist, Gladdolin was an optimist. He tried to see the best he could in the worst situations. He had a few traits that he did as simple, happy party favors for many people that he saw. Ways to buck up people's spirits, or just a way to please himself. Gladdolin, his design was quite unique. Gartered in full tattoos from head to toe, wearing simple leaf garbs around his midsection, and mostly vines to cover up some of the other body parts. He naturally had a way to grow the vines on top of them. And true to his name, the one thing that he would always pass off to everybody was roses. Someone could tell, if he could tell that someone felt a little down, he would try to cheer him up with a little party favor of growing a rose off of his arm. Passing it over to them. Really adopting his Rosewind name. And this is what he felt like he could do. Throughout time in Heartwind, he discovered of what this great journey was. He felt a need to join. Maybe he couldn't necessarily be the fighter of the group, but he has things he could offer. A sense of experience. A knowledge of at least how this thing fights. A plan strategist. Essentially a perfect support role. He knew he could never be in the front of the battle, but he knew that he was a helper. And everyone needs one. Everyone needs a friend, everyone needs a support role. And that's what he adopted for some time. Thinking that every chosen has guardians. And guardians by default probably are just soldiers. Ways of the blade or ways of magic. But maybe they need someone who is just there for them. There to bring up their spirits. Maybe someone to give a little bit of health. Maybe someone just to be there to pick them up. So Gladdolin decided to be this person. Not knowing if the chosen would pick him, he didn't know what he had to offer. But he decided he'd try. Waited in Heartwind until it was the day announced by the king, his true heir. Gladdolin was anticipated to see who this person was, knowing that he would have to deal with someone who's a human, and probably have to make sure that during this process that they would understand that elves and humans will have to deal with each other. But to his amazement, the person walked up wasn't fully human. As mentioned in the episode, Seraphina was a Genasi. And in Nelithir, Genasis are very uncommon. Rare, to say the least. And Gladdolin has not seen one. He's heard of them. But in Nelithir, the only ones that he would have seen were Earth and Wind Genasis. Both find it as an oddity, but a happy sigh of relief. Gladdolin did what he could to try to push himself forward. Again, not knowing what to exactly offer, but he knew what he had to give. First one he picked was a Triton out of the group, Averant. Gladdolin didn't know what to do. What can I do to prove? But something about him stood out to Seraphina. Gladdolin was unique, both personality-wise and physicality. And Seraphina wanted friends, not warriors. People she could relate to, not people that would just stand by her as a sword and shield. And in the crowd, she saw this long, red-haired, tall, lengthy elf. Greener than most. He stood out. Whether she found them as more of the oddball, or just silly, or quirky, there was something about him that she looked at that she just was hoping that he was going to say something. And just like Valerian and Seraphina, the eyes locked in for a second as they both were looking at each other, and they both knew that they were looking at each other from distance. And with that moment, Gladdolin decided to speak up. And without even finishing, she immediately pointed at him and requested him to come forth, asking for his name as he responded for his first time saying his surname. Gladdolin Rosewind. At this time, many people of Nelithir that were there didn't actually know that the chieftain's son was there without permission. But at this point, he was chosen. What could they do? Now, there are 3 kingdoms in total. The chosen is allowed to have 5 guardians. So, obviously she can pick some from other kingdoms. But realistically, there's only one that she picked from Nelithir, which is Gladdolin. And the only one that she picked from the Abyss is Valerian. That gives a total of 2 warriors. 5 in total, including herself. We're still missing 2. Now these 2 will eventually be brought up in the next episode, as they are kind of a pair. But we have our 2 guardians thus far. Gladdolin himself plays another very important role as much as Seraphina Valerian. As I mentioned earlier, he eventually becomes the god of fate and destiny for about a good 50 years. He gains a power even before that transcends what some minuscule gods can do. And this is before he actually becomes a god himself. There is a mystery to his clan that he is not aware of, a power to it that he is destined to obtain, that he doesn't know exists. And that power is extremely unique. But Gladdolin falls down a path that is different from the rest of them that are in this campaign. He plays a support role, but within time, Gladdolin becomes the ultimate character of the team as far as power. finding a Druid that... It is funny that in our campaigns, when we have Druids, they somehow find a way to be the strongest and the ultimate tank of the team. With campaign 1.5, there's Gaju. And in this one, the tank goes to Gladdolin after a little while. But it takes some time for him to get there. Currently right now, he's not a fighter. He's not a soldier. The main tactics he has are spells. Simple spells. And his wild shape. But he eventually gets more power. In a very unique way. It does not take long for him to get it. He doesn't look for it, he doesn't search for it, but it happens to find him. Gladdolin himself was definitely some comical reprieve for the group. Being a sort of... If he chose to be a bard, it would fit perfectly. But even without the inspiration, Gladdolin himself had a way to be as a character, give a way to roleplay with other characters to lighten up their spirits. Unfortunately, the player that plays Gladdolin is no longer part of the group. We love him, but with some lifestyle changes in the way the world is, we don't know if he's going to join us again, but we love him and we would love him to return back. And because of that, that's why I keep Gladdolin in the campaigns. And forever, he will always be part of the Nerdy Playbook, whenever he wants to return. And that's why Gladdolin is always in these. In campaign 2, he was very prominent. Campaign 3, only a little bit. Playing a 1/3 role that is kind of a little bit hidden. And in campaign 1.5, for a lot of beginning, he was the god patron for Dahlia. That is the story starting up with Gladdolin Rosewind. I didn't want to add in too much stuff. With, as I said, our player for Gladdolin Rosewind not here right now, I don't really want to butcher his story too much. But we'll still go over many of his stuff as we continue on in a couple sessions. 2 to be exact. We'll start off with episode 1 of the story. But before we get there, we got one more character episode. But we'll be talking about 2 of them in one. Now there are 2 more Guardians that are going to join. Like I said, they're not from Nilithir. And they're not from Aberys. But they are elves. But believe it or not, they were actually part of the Heartwind Kingdom. And as I said once, Heartwind Kingdom invites all in. No discrimination. And these 2 are unique for that way, as they are definitely the oddballs for even their own kind. But not specifically their race. It's their class. Not brothers, not sisters, but bonded friends that decide to join together as a pack deal. So, for the last episode, for the character arcs or the world of Averant, check us out next Friday for the backstory before episode 1 of Verithidril and Norin. And if you're watching campaign 3, these characters are becoming ever so prevalent. So, we'll have that episode next Friday. After that, we'll start talking about the actual campaign. And we'll start getting into it. Now, the campaign itself, even before we streamed, and then up to the streaming episodes, was about 50 episodes long. But we also did longer sessions. Started shortening them down in campaign 2. So there's a lot of content to go over. But, as I'm just narrating them, I'm not going to go through every single battle point. So, We'll probably go a narration. They'll cover 3 episodes every session. Some liberties will be taken as certain things have changed. And realistically, I'm a dungeon master that's going over my notes over the past 3 to 4 years. So, it is my story, and I'm going to go back the way that I remember it. And we might have some people along the way that are going to be joining. Perhaps one of the players will join in the sessions and partake in a back and forth. Because this will be fun. Not only talking about the session, but then afterwards, well, not just narrating the session, but afterwards talking about it. So, hope you all enjoyed the small little backstory of Gladdolin before everything. Gladdolin is a very important role, and one day I hope that his player will return. But until that time, all his characters live within our campaigns, and they forever live in our hearts. So, everybody have a fantastic weekend. I will be streaming pretty soon, playing some Baldur's Gate. If you want to join in to watch out the stream, I would be happy to have you in. So,